There's this aspect within perhaps the way that some Western approaches to Buddhism or some aspects of Buddhist tradition have taken the understandings, the profound and wonderful understandings of the mind and of Buddhism. It is this sort of almost pathological fear of ever being attached to anything. Now, of course, that's based on the understanding that attachment is the root of the deluded aspect of the mind, which leads us into building the acquired self, which leads us into more formation of the self, which leads us into more suffering and dukkha. But really, it's a misunderstanding often of the difference between what becoming attached to something is and what allowing oneself to become intimate with something. It's not the same thing. And often it becomes conflated. So within the tantric arts, the difference with the tantric arts is to become involved with life, to become connected to your waking, your sleeping, your lovemaking, your exercise, your eating, your dying. That the whole of Tantrism, as it developed from very, very early up until now, through the Hindu, fundamentally the Eastern traditions really, through the Hindu tradition, Taoism and Buddhism, which Buddhism of course has a very strong tantric aspect, largely expressed now in Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana and Tibetan Buddhism, and the Nyingma traditions. And there's a number of Tibetan Buddhism which has taken the understanding of Tantrism and Tantra into a whole field, just as the Hindu connection and yoga really was the real root of a lot of the practices that we're doing. So, back as far as 1,500 BC, it's a long time ago, 1,500 before the birth of Christ, we're now, 2020 after the birth of Christ, because our timeline is measured according to this teacher's birth and life. Ish, it's a bit made up. Because who knows when he really was born, and who knows, all these dates are somewhat wobbly, and some of the people in all of the dates even we don't even know really existed, or mythological teaching figures. But anyway, if we just go along that line, just accept that we're going to use it as a way of understanding the development process. 1,500 BC, when the first sort of written records of yoga, or of anything tantric, was written, and that's in the Rig Vedas, where in the Rig Vedas is the first time they started to refer to yoking the mind to its innate luminosity. So that was mentioned in the Rig Vedas 1,500 years before the birth of Christ. And then you have this whole period where it seems as though, particularly in the forest schools of ancient India, around the time that they were writing the Upanishads, there was quite a profound period of teaching and learning that was going on in those forest schools of India. The Upanishads are really worth reading for anybody interested in some of the ancient roots to these practices. I'd highly recommend looking into the Upanishads. They're wonderful texts. And then you have a whole period when around sort of, I suppose, from about 400 to 600 BC, where you have Buddha was born, and Lao Tzu, Chuang Tzu, all lived in this period of history. And obviously all of the, allegedly, it's a bit difficult to know with figures like Lao Tzu how real he was, or how much he's an agglomeration of a lot of the teachings that were being taught at this period in history. And then there's a whole development process, which, as I said, I'll go into a little bit more later. But this process is the uncovering of these elements that need to be present within a body-based practice, within a tantric practice, within a practice that is using the workshop of the body as the vehicle for transformation. Not just working purely through the mind, which some aspects of Buddhism would approach practice from that position. So one argument for the value of that is because we, perhaps one could say actually profoundly, are living through a time where the renunciate path is really not needed anymore in the same way. That we do not necessarily need secret covens of practice that are hidden away from life. That increasingly perhaps we need a practice that is connected to being a householder, which of course was always the root of tantric practice. The monastic traditions developed out of a whole sort of phase of development of practice, but very much centred around not being a householder, not being in life, not having family, not managing bills, not managing, all the other things, tax returns, and getting pissed off with your partner, and the annoying person driving their car, and all those things, because those ways of practicing were quite rarefied, and obviously often in environments where all that was occurring was practice. So the understanding of working within a body-based practice is that we then can sort of harmonise our spiritual practice with every aspect of our life, every aspect of our life. And when your spiritual practice involves your body, that makes it a far easier segue really between the two, because your body is with you the whole time. You can't get away from your body. It's not as simple as just perhaps sitting doing some meditation practice, and you're in, if you've got any skill at meditation practice, maybe you're in some of the expansive qualities of the mind. Maybe you're able to really move into very expanded states. And then how do you integrate that? Because that's where, to my view, the body comes in, is that unless we're able to have something that anchors some of these expansions properly within our life, within our physical body, then we're going to hit trouble around some of these expansions. In a mild way, it's what some of you have been talking to me about, and you were just mentioning this morning, Carolyn. Many people have had this kind of conversation with me about when they move into certain states of expansion and just finding themselves becoming highly sensitized. Far more aware of what's going on within them, far more aware of what's going on in the environment, far more moved, far more kind of sensitive to the various qualities of energy, not just within their own body, but in the environmental influences, whether that's positive or negative, and finding that quite difficult to manage for a while. And again, that comes back to practice. It comes back to actually what I started this talk with, which is the three regulations, the three harmonizations, because once the energetic field has become unfettered enough to naturally move into expansion, which is the whole essence of the Nagol practices that we're working on, what we work on, what we do is release. What we're working on is the letting go. What we're working on is the stepping into more and more freedom from those aspects of constriction and tension as they manifest in the body-mind continuum. And as those begin to let go more and more, what naturally starts to pour into that space is the liveliness of the deeper aspects of your soul, the deeper aspects of your mind. And the soul starts to look for expression in your life, because the acquired mind, the egoic self, the self as we've talked about it in so many different forms, that formation of self, the formation of personality, is increasingly loose, is increasingly soft, is increasingly beginning to the grip of identity to self is increasingly getting less through the practice. And as that occurs, the soul and the qualities connected to the soul of love and compassion and clarity, these levels of feeling, the soul is full of feeling. That's the nature of the soul, is it expresses through feeling. Not necessarily the spirit, the soul expresses through feeling. that quality of feeling is what wants to find its way to have reflection of and relate into life with. So that quality of felt connection to life, of being moved, of awe, of wonder, of joy, of those kind of expansive qualities of feeling will increasingly come into your experience of your life. And we need the anchor of the body and effectively of what, how do we create these three regulations? It's really easy. You just build your dantian. That's it. It's like so many things with this art, the theory and the understanding is really complicated. The practice is super simple. You just do the body work and build the dantian. And as you build the dantian, those three regulations start to occur by themselves, because one of the little secrets in it is that we need enough density in each layer, density within the body, density within the formation and the way that we're working with the chi. The chi needs to become dense, you will know that, that's how it affects the inside of the body. We start to get the arm to move and everything to move. The chi's thickened because there's more of it. And we need enough clarity in the mind, and then once each level is strong, it affects the level below it. That's the nature of the three regulations. So as soon as the mind is in a reasonably happy and calm and open state, so there's a good, strong connection to the mind, it affects the chi. As soon as the chi is really strong, fluid, moving through the channels reasonably, effectively, vibrant, it affects the body, and vice versa. As soon as the body is open and not toxic, and we're eating well, and we're breathing well, and the joints are open, and all the other things we've worked on, that affects the chi. As soon as that affects the chi, then the fields, the chi, remember, is the fields within and outside of the body. So those fields outside the body start to organise. That's how you know that your chi, the element of chi is beginning to become strong, is that those fields organise. They're not chaotic. So as soon as you strengthen the chi, we have the direct result of the fields becoming activated is Zuffaron. And that's just expressing the chaos that's in your fields. That's all it is. And so each time the chi goes up, each time you build the dantian a bit more, each time you can access a little bit more yang chi, each time the yang chi starts to move more strongly through the channels, particularly in the channels that haven't been widened or opened correctly, or are beginning to be widened and opened correctly, that yang chi starts to then move. In opening and widening the body, the huang and the channels, that builds more yang chi, so you get in that circulation of slowly just building more and more and more chi. And in building more chi, you set off the chaos that's stopping the fields being organised in the first place, so it is to express itself for a while. Hence, all the Zuffaron that you've all got going on. And then as that organises, those fields start to be less chaotic and become more organised, and that's when you get the type of, for those of you in that process, you get the kind of Zuffaron that's much more around mudras. Certain things start to come into the Zuffaron, sounds that are an expression of the organisation of the field. The body just starts to make shapes that are expressing whatever it is that's going on in the field, that's starting to organise. Remember, the field moves in like the Hunyuan and mixed circles, all these mixed rotations. And as that whole process starts to occur, that changes the mind. So then all of that is anchored into the aspect of the dantian that is the fuel to all of this process. The lower dantian, not the other dantian, but the lower dantian. Being the fuel for all of that process, being the fuel for and the anchor upon which we can allow all those expansions to increasingly strengthen, because we are constantly repaying attention to anchoring and building this lower centre so that we can build chi and not have it and send us into, so that we can open the central channel. Ultimately, that's, you know, as I know all of you are interested in the spiritual side of the arts. We're not here doing medical qigong. You know, so what we're interested in is that profound opening into the core of our being, the profound opening into deeper states of consciousness and meditation. But all of those deeper states are effectively, to use other words, more yang-chi. You know, that's all they are. You know, ultimate expression of yang-chi is light, right? You know? So you know, more yang-chi just means light, and that growing of light, or that strength of yang-chi needs to be safe within the circuitry, because the more that the yang-chi builds, the more these regulations have to be increasingly harmonised and put in place. So generally there are stages to it, and along all these stages we go wonky. You know, you're never going to get it perfect. You know, you're going to work on your body too much, or you're going to go into, some people are more sort of chi junkies and they go too much into the chi aspect of it. Some people just get into meditation and just in the mind, and they forget, oh Christ, yeah, I've got a body as well. And as you're going through the process, we all need to do that, because you have to explore and find your relationship. This is your art, right? And this is what I found so wonderful about looking into some of the history of these practices, is looking at it very much from the point of view of, well, someone came up with all this, and how, you know, it's best